What's going on, guys? So the first season of X-Men 97 has concluded, and in this video I'm going to review it. I have to clarify, first I'm going to talk about the episodes and then do a brief review afterward. Lately, people have been saying that I should just call it a recap or something, because all I do is talk about what happened in the episode. Well, how about I do whatever I want to do? How's that sound? Okay, let's get started. The first episode starts off with a group of thugs called the Friends of Humanity, who kidnap Roberto di Costa, the son of a wealthy guy. The kid is a mutant, so the thugs put a collar on him to block his powers. Just as the X-Men show up to save him, the Friends arm themselves with Sentinel blasters. Cyclops, Storm, and Bishop bust in and start kicking ass. Afterward, back at the school, Cyclops is trying to keep everyone in line as the new leader of the team, but Gambit, especially, isn't having it. Just then, Jean walks in, who's now pregnant. I'm assuming with Cable. But it hasn't been specified just yet. A while later, Jubilee and the others put Roberto in the danger room to see what his powers are, but he doesn't end up using them. Then, Cyclops and Jean talk with their friend Dr. Cooper about who could be supplying the Friends of Humanity with Sentinel technology. And she assumes it's Bolivar Trask, the man who created the Sentinels. Suddenly, Roberto runs away, and Cyclops tasks the X-Men with tracking him down. Their search leads them to a nightclub where they find Roberto and take him back to the school. Then the team pays a visit to a guy named Gyrick, who killed Charles Xavier. They try to get him to reveal the location of Bolivar Trask, but he tells them nothing. So then, Jean just ends up using her powers to find Trask's hideout in the Sahara Desert, where they fight through a wave of Sentinels, including a big one named Master Mold. Following that, Cooper shows up with a military unit to arrest Trask. Back at the school, Roberto reveals his power to Jubilee, which is solar energy, and then he just casually walks out. Then, the X-Men return to find Magneto, who tells them that when Charles died, he left everything he owned, including the team, to him. In episode 2, the Coney Island Ferris wheel is about to collapse as firefighters try to rescue the citizens that are trapped on it. When it finally comes crashing down, Magneto shows up to save everyone, leaving them all confused as to why he helped. Following that, Magneto saves a group of mutants from the Friends of Humanity. Back at the school, the X-Men are hesitant to trust him, but he says he just wants to honor Xavier's wishes and help bring about mutants and humans coexisting. Later on, Magneto is talking with Rogue about getting the others to trust him, and it's revealed that the two of them had a relationship at some point in the past. Just then, Cooper shows up with a military unit and tries to arrest Magneto for his past crimes. Surprisingly, he willingly goes with them to show he's good now. As Cyclops and the others go to Magneto's court hearing to fight off protesters, Wolverine stays behind with Jean, who suddenly goes into labor. Back at the court hearing, one of the Friends of Humanity shows up with armor and calls himself Executioner. As he beats the hell out of Cyclops, Morph jumps into the fight and starts transforming into various X-Men characters, like Psylocke and Colossus. Storm demands the guards at the hearing to free Magneto so that he can aid in the fight. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Rogue and Cyclops show up, but the doctor refuses to deliver a mutant baby. So, Rogue uses her powers to steal his medical knowledge and does it herself. As Magneto and Storm fight off the protesters, Executioner shoots at Magneto with a mutant cure gun, but Storm jumps in front of him and gets hit, taking her powers away. Pissed at this, Magneto takes Cooper, Executioner, and some others into space and says that if not for Charles' wishes, that he'd probably kill them all. A while later, Storm learns that her powers are permanently gone and decides to leave the team. As the team's reading a note she left behind, there's a knock at the door, who turns out to be Jean. The problem is, Jean was already inside reading the note, so there's two Jeans now. In episode 3, Beast runs some tests on the Jean that showed up at the door and finds out that she's the real one. The Jean we've been seeing the past few episodes is a clone. But the clone thinks that she's the real one. None of the other X-Men believe her, and not even Cyclops. After they talk about the situation for a minute, a strange voice comes over a baby monitor calling out to Jean, who turns out to be Mr. Sinister. Meanwhile, Beast figures out that Sinister is the one that cloned Jean and he's been controlling her the whole time. Mr. Sinister then reveals that he wants her baby, Nathan. Yep, Nathan Summers, as in Cable. All of a sudden, the fake Jean starts to flip out and destroy everything in the room. Then, Sinister shows up and starts making everyone hallucinate. Eventually, the mansion is overtaken by all kinds of nightmarish creatures, and the floor opens up, dropping the X-Men into what looks like hell. Cyclops and Bishop fight through these flying bat creatures, and then the real Jean wakes up and saves them, taking them back to the mansion. Suddenly, though, she gets knocked out, and the fake Jean starts to call herself the Goblin Queen before running off with Nathan. Back at Sinister's lair, he puts Nathan in a tube of green goop. After that, the X-Men show up to rescue Nathan, and fake Jean fights Magneto. The real Jean wakes up and takes the fake one on some kind of Christmas Carol type adventure where they revisit Jean's past. This causes the fake Jean to fight off Sinister's control, and she helps to rescue Nathan. Back at the school, they find out that he has a techno-organic virus that's advancing pretty quickly. His only hope for a possible cure is in the future, so Bishop takes him there. Then the fake Jean leaves, who starts calling herself Madeline Pryor. Afterward, Storm is approached by another mutant named Forge, who says he can give her her powers back. In episode 4, it's Jubilee's 18th birthday, and she wants the team to go to a local arcade. But instead, Magneto wants them to do drills in the danger room. Jubilee goes back to her room, where she finds a mysterious video game console called Motendo, and she decides to play it with Roberto. All of a sudden, a bunch of metal tentacles come out of the machine and consume them, which ends up throwing them into a digital world. Out of nowhere, they're attacked by a Sentinel. Then, they're transported to Genosha, where they get shot at. Just then, Mojo appears and basically says he trapped them inside the game for his own amusement. After Roberto nearly gets killed, Jubilee has to fight the game's version of Magneto one-on-one. She finally defeats him and obtains an extra life, which she gives to Roberto. Then, they encounter a programmed version of an older Jubilee that Mojo once created to test his game world out, and she helps them defeat Mojo in a boss fight, allowing them to escape back to the real world. Meanwhile, Forge puts Storm in a machine to get her powers back, but it doesn't end up working. Then, Storm finds out that a long time ago, Forge helped build the mutant power dampening collars for the government. He pleads his case with her and says that he brought her there because he loves her, but then she just slaps the shit out of him. Then Storm storms out of the room, no pun intended, and she ends up falling off a horse where she crashes back through the roof of Forge's house. I'm pretty sure she's hallucinating all of this, but it's hard to tell. Then a giant demonic owl comes in and bites Forge. In Part 5, Genosha, the island that's home to the mutants, gets added to the United Nations, and a reporter is at the mansion speaking with Beast about it. Magneto, Gambit, and Rogue fly over to Genosha to check things out. They mention that a long time ago, the island used to enslave mutants, but now it seems like a happy community. They run into Cooper, who's standing with Madeline Pryor, who was just put on Genosha's interim council. After that, Nightcrawler appears and takes them on a tour of the city. Back at the mansion, while Cyclops is talking with a reporter, Jean and Logan are hiding from the media as Jean practices her powers. They start talking, and suddenly, Jean kisses Logan. Uh-oh. The reporter strikes a nerve with Cyclops when she brings up Nathan, and he walks out of the interview, saying that he's glad mutants are nothing like regular people. Back on Genosha, the council talks with Magneto and wants him to basically rule over the island. He agrees and wants Rogue to be his queen, but she wants no part of it. Back at the mansion, Jean finds out that Cyclops has been secretly talking with Madeline, and she freaks out. They get into a huge argument about it, and Cyclops says he loves both Jean and Madeline. Things get even crazier when Rogue finally comes clean to Gambit about her and Magneto. She tells him that they used to be a thing a long time ago, and then she says that Magneto can touch her because basically his powers protect him, but Gambit can't. Then Gambit tells her he just wants to be friends. This episode is pretty crazy. Later on, there's an event in Genosha with the council. Rogue changes her mind and shows up to be at Magneto's side. As Magneto and Rogue start making out all over the place, Jean and Madeline simultaneously have a nosebleed as an adult Nathan tries to contact them through telepathy. Cable appears and starts trying to evacuate everyone in a haste. And just then, a Sentinel attacks the event and blows up the building, determined to kill all the mutants. Nightcrawler saves Magneto and Rogue at the last second, and they regroup with Gambit on a rooftop. After the main Sentinel, Master Mold, kills a few more mutants, including Madeline, Gambit sacrifices himself to blow it up. Part 6 starts off with the Kree fighting against the Shi'ar in space. Then they're having a giant meeting where one of them, Lilandra, introduces the new Emperor of the Shi'ar, which turns out to be Charles Xavier. Later on, they're talking and Charles tries to convince Lilandra to go back to Earth with him, but she doesn't want to. Meanwhile, Storm is trying to nurse Forge back to health, who is infected by the demonic owl. Storm ends up getting into a fight with the owl and is saved by Forge, who uses the Doctor Strange-looking spell to defeat it. Forge tells Storm about a cure for his infection, which is a cactus in a nearby cave, and they set out to find it. Back with the Shi'ar, Liandra's sister, Deathbird, shows up to express her disapproval of her marriage to Charles because he's from Earth. Deathbird says the only way she'll approve is if he erases all of his memories of Earth. So who the hell is this lady just to waltz in here and demand shit? Anyway, when Charles hesitates to get rid of his memories, Deathbird attacks, but she's blocked by Gladiator, who's pretty much Liandra's bodyguard. All of a sudden, a huge fight breaks out between Deathbird's soldiers and the Shi'ar soldiers. Angered, Charles uses his power to send them all to the astral plane. Back in the cave, Storm is crawling through a tight space to retrieve the cactus when the demonic owl returns to taunt her. She ends up getting her powers back by just believing in herself. Wow, is that really all it took? Then, she destroys the owl and cures Forge of the infection. In the astral plane, Charles tells the Shi'ars that their empire is comprised of subjugated worlds that are all forced to assimilate into their own. All of a sudden, a giant Gambit appears and turns them all into skeletons. I'm not really too sure what happened there. But anyway, they all return to their bodies, and Charles says he must return to Earth to help the X-Men. The episode ends with Mr. Sinister tracking down Bolivar Trask and telling him the Sentinels destroying Genosha was just the beginning. In episode 7, the X-Men attend Gambit's funeral. Afterward, Rogue attacks a U.S. Army base looking for Bolivar Trask. The rest of the X-Men go to Genosha to aid in the cleanup and help the survivors. As Rogue goes looking for Gyrick, she runs into Captain America, who tells her to stand down. But then, he tells Rogue that he's also looking for Gyrick because of what happened in Genosha. They track Gyrick to Mexico, and Rogue wants to go get him, but Cap says they have to do things by the book. She reacts by hurling his shield into the distance by some mountains. What a bitch. As Beast is in Genosha helping to clean up, Rogue finds Gyrick at his mansion and questions him about the whereabouts of Trask. Jean uses her psychic abilities to locate a live mutant still trapped under the debris, who turns out to be Emma Frost. All of a sudden, the X-Men get a message from Trask himself, telling them to find him in Madripoor, and that Mr. Sinister put him up to attacking Genosha. Meanwhile, Roberto and Jubilee return to Roberto's parents' house and comes clean about him being a mutant, to which his mother is pretty relieved. Apparently, his parents knew the whole time and were okay with him being a mutant. So then why the hell did he run away? But out of nowhere, the mom 180s and says they have to keep it a secret. So which one is it, lady? Like, pick a side. Back in Madripoor, the X-Men find Trask, who's up on a roof about to jump off. He tells them that he was basically forced to work for Mr. Sinister, who's creating a new, more advanced type of Sentinel. After hearing this, Rogue ends up dropping Trask to his death. But all of a sudden, the team gets attacked by none other than Trask, who turns out to be a humanoid Sentinel. And he kicks their ass pretty bad, until Cable shows up to save them. As all that's going on, Sinister is talking to a guy named Bastion, who he appears to be working for, and they find out that Charles Xavier is still alive and that the X-Men lied about his death. The episode ends with Bastion having Magneto tied up. Episode 8 starts off with Cable telling the X-Men about Bastion and his plan. The new advanced Sentinels have the same techno-organic virus that Cable had as a baby, and they're now capable of reproducing, which could mean a new race of human Sentinel hybrids. Also, that he's been pretty much behind everything going on so far. After going to Bastion's childhood home, the X-Men discover that he too is a mutant who can hear machines. Dr. Cooper pays Bastion a visit to see what he's been up to, and he tells her about Operation Zero Tolerance, in which he's been taking regular humans and turning them into Sentinel hybrids without their consent. The X-Men reprogram Cerebro to track everyone who's a Sentinel, and as it turns out, it's literally almost everyone. Jubilee and Roberto even encounter one at the mall. Then, Wolverine and Nightcrawler defend the mansion as more Sentinels attack. Roberto and Rogue get captured by a few of the Sentinels as Bastion arrives to the facility that Magneto is being held at. But when he walks in, Dr. Cooper had just freed him and lets him escape. Magneto then sends out a massive electromagnetic field that destroys all the human Sentinel hybrids all at once. We even see a brief cameo of the 90s Spider-Man, who senses the magnetic field in Queens. As they're cleaning up all the Sentinel bodies laying around, a ship crashes to the ground, and Xavier appears. In episode 9, Charles, now back on Earth, rummages through the wreckage of the mansion as Magneto dons his old attire and faces a legion of ships in the ocean. Meanwhile, Storm and Forge rescue Jubilee and Roberto. They bring them back to the mansion as some of the others are cleaning up. Rogue is recovering in a nearby room, but doesn't remember much of what happened. Sometime later, all the X-Men are having a meeting about what to do next, with the end seeming to be near, because Magneto's latest attack destroyed the Earth's magnetic field. They split into two teams, with one going to enlist Magneto's help and the other going to Bastion's main hideout. But before they can leave, Magneto confronts them all, wanting Charles to do things his way. He wants them to help start a new Genosha. Immediately, Rogue and Roberto vote to go with Magneto, while the others decline and stay with Charles. Afterward, they all suit up in their old school outfits and go after Bastion. It's a pretty cool nod that they put that in there. Anyway, half the team makes it to the island, where the team gets bombarded by Sentinels that are being controlled by Bastion. As the classic theme song hits, there's a scene where Morph turns into the Hulk and starts smashing one of them. Then, it's on. A huge fight occurs. Beast rips off one of their hands and pimp slaps him with it. All of a sudden, Mr. Sinister shows up and starts fighting Jean. As that's going on, the other half of the team goes to space where they confront Magneto on an asteroid, who also breaks into a giant brawl. Back on the island, Sinister possesses Cable and makes him attack Jean, who ends up killing her. Then Wolverine manages to take Magneto's helmet, allowing Charles to get into his mind. But it suddenly backfires and Magneto almost kills Charles, until Wolverine impales him, leaving everybody in shock. All of a sudden, Magneto just rips the adamantium right out of Wolverine's body. The finale starts off as a flashback with Charles and Magneto discussing the state of mutants in the world. As it turns out, Charles is just inside Magneto's mind. Magneto argues that Charles is defending humankind, saying that they're beneath mutants. They have a mental battle, with Magneto trying to force Charles out of his mind, but Charles uses all of his power to overpower Magneto, resulting in it being felt all over the world. Here we have cameos from Doctor Strange and Daredevil, feeling the effects of their fight. Back on the island, Bastion confronts the X-Men, who he captures and nearly kills. We then see the President, who's being guarded by Captain America and Iron Man, as more Sentinel hybrids emerge to surround them. This also happens in Wakanda, where they ambush Black Panther. Just when things look grim, Jean reemerges as Phoenix and subdues Bastion, placing a power dampener on his head, which then destroys all the hybrids. Mr. Sinister tries to attack Jean, but she ends up taking back all of his mutant powers, leaving him a shell of his former self. Furious that he can no longer control the hybrids, Bastion rips off Cable's arm and beats him with it. Charles briefs the others in space about what Bastion did, and then Bastion shows up on the asteroid, which he then plans to send crashing into Earth. Rogue tries to attack him, but she fails. Magneto fell into a coma after his last encounter with Charles, and Charles goes back into his mind to wake him up. Meanwhile, Roberto, now going by Sunspot, joins the fight against Bastion, along with the others on the asteroid. Thanks to Cyclops and Jubilee, Bastion is almost defeated. A Sentinel comes crashing in and lands right on top of him, with the other X-Men inside. Instead of killing Bastion, though, the team tries to appeal to his humanity. All of a sudden, the government sends a bunch of missiles into the asteroid, blowing up a portion of it, along with killing Bastion. Then, with the asteroid crashing down to Earth, the team bands together to destroy it. Here we can see Peter Parker and Mary Jane from their own 90s cartoon watching the report on the news. Magneto wakes up out of his coma just in time to destroy the asteroid before it comes into the atmosphere, which presumably kills the X-Men in the crossfire. 6 months later, Forge is approached by Bishop, who tells him that the X-Men aren't dead. They just got thrown throughout time. Half the team ends up in 3000 BC Egypt, where they're confronted by En-Sabah-Nur, aka Apocalypse, while the other half is in 3960 AD, in the future, where they run into Mother Ascani and a young Cable. The end. So, what can I say about this one? Well, it was real refreshing to have a continuation of the classic series. Even though some of the stuff was updated just a little bit and aimed at an older audience, I'm definitely okay with that. Magneto was a great villain, riding the line between good and evil, believing that his actions were true. And then Bastion, the real bad guy, who ended up getting roasted like a frickin' marshmallow. We got to see cameos from all the other 90s cartoon heroes too, like Spider-Man, Iron Man, and we even got to see Jean Grey turn into Phoenix. This really had everything. Hopefully at some point we can get a season 2. Anyway, thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you later.